In a small Igbo village nestled at the foot of the hills, it was said that no woman could cry more tears than Nnenna. But Nnenna's tears weren't ordinary, they didn't fall for herself but for the village and its secrets. Every tear carried the weight of a curse that no one dared to speak of. The elders feared what would happen if Nnenna ever stopped crying. But one night, the tears dried up, and with that, the earth began to shake. Nnenna was born on a stormy night, the kind where thunder cracked the sky like an angry whip, and lightning painted the heavens in furious streaks. Her mother, an herbalist, believed her birth was a sign. This child, her mother whispered, cradling her newborn, will be the one to lift the curse. Nnenna grew up as an oddity in her village. Unlike the other children, she never laughed, but she never truly cried either. Her tears, however, came at night, in silence, when the moon watched over the village. It was then that Nnenna's tears would flow, soaking her pillow but never making a sound. And each tear she shed was not her own. She wept for the sorrows of others, the barren woman who longed for a child, the father whose son had been taken by the river, and the young men who never returned from the forest. Somehow, Nnenna felt all of their grief as if it were her own. The villagers revered her for her strange gift, believing that her nightly tears kept misfortune from their doors. The elders would say, as long as Nnenna cries, we will be safe. But no one truly knew why or how this belief came to be. All they knew was that her tears brought peace. And so Nnenna cried, every night, year after year, until her body ached and her spirit felt heavy. The village thrived under Nnenna's unspoken burden. The crops were bountiful, the rains came when needed, and even the harshest droughts passed without disaster. But there was one thing the villagers never dared to discuss, the absence of laughter in Nnenna's life, her inability to express her own joys or sadness. One evening, while gathering herbs near the edge of the forest, Nnenna met a stranger. His name was Chima, a traveler from a distant land, whose smile seemed brighter than the sun itself. "Why do you look so sad?" he asked, genuinely concerned. Nnenna, not used to speaking of herself, tried to change the subject, but Chima persisted. "It must be exhausting to carry the burdens of an entire village on your shoulders." Nnenna hesitated but finally said, "I cry for them because they cannot cry for themselves. It is my duty." Chima shook his head. "That is no life. What if the village could weep its own sorrows?" His words struck something deep within Nnenna, something she had never allowed herself to consider. That night, when the moon rose and Nnenna's tears should have come, her eyes remained dry. She felt nothing, no pain, no grief, only silence. The earth below her trembled, and a low, distant rumble echoed through the hills. For the first time in her life, Nnenna wondered what would happen if she let the village feel its own sorrow. The next day, strange things began to happen. The sun shone brighter, but it burned the crops. The river, once full of life, began to dry up. A once peaceful village turned restless. The people grew irritable, snapping at one another for no reason. Even the children, who had always been joyful, were now silent, their eyes dull and haunted. The elders called for Nnenna. "Why have you stopped crying?" they demanded. "Do you not see what is happening? The village is suffering." Nnenna, her voice steady but resolute, said, "Why must I cry for everyone? The village should feel its own pain, and only then will they know how to heal." The elders were furious. "Do you not understand? We place this burden upon you to keep the village safe. Without your tears, the curse will return." Nnenna felt a deep sadness in her heart, not for herself but for the village that had grown so dependent on her suffering. "Perhaps it is not my tears that have kept the curse away but the village's refusal to face its own sorrow." That night, as the moon rose, the village was silent. No one spoke of the growing cracks in the earth or the ominous clouds gathering on the horizon. But Nnenna could feel it, the weight of centuries of pain, buried beneath the surface, was rising. The village woke to the sound of thunder, not from the sky but from the ground itself. The earth shook violently, and the great Iroko tree at the village center, said to be older than time itself, began to wither. Nnenna stood before the tree, her heart heavy. Chima appeared by her side, his smile gone, replaced by a look of deep understanding. "This is not your burden to carry alone," he said softly. "The village must face its past." The elders gathered the villagers at the base of the tree, where they finally revealed the truth. Many generations ago, a great famine had struck the land. In their desperation, the ancestors made a pact with the earth, one life in exchange for prosperity. But the earth was not satisfied with just one life, it demanded tears, endless tears to feed its hunger. Thus, a girl was chosen, every generation, to cry for the village, to appease the earth's hunger. Nnenna was the latest in a long line of weeping daughters. Realizing the depth of the village's secret, Nnenna wept, not out of obligation but for the injustice done to her and the countless girls before her. Her tears, born of true emotion, soaked the earth, and for the first time, the earth wept back. As Nnenna cried, the sky opened up, and a gentle rain fell, washing over the village. The trembling earth grew still, and the cracks began to close. The Iroko tree, once withered, began to bloom again. The curse, which had bound the village in silence and sorrow for so long, was finally lifted. But the village had learned a valuable lesson. The people gathered together, embracing their own pain and joy, no longer relying on one person to bear their burdens. They mourned the past but looked forward to a future where they would share in both the tears and the laughter. Nnenna, for the first time in her life, felt light. She turned to Chima, who smiled once more, but this time, his smile was for her. "Your tears have freed us all," he said. And from that day on, Nnenna no longer cried alone. In the years that followed, the village flourished, not because of one girl's tears but because they had learned to face their own grief. Nnenna became a symbol of strength, a reminder that true healing begins when we confront our pain rather than hide from it. The villagers passed down her story to future generations, not as a warning but as a celebration of resilience and community. They would say, "Tears are not to be feared, they are the rain that nurtures the soul." And so, the village lived, not in sorrow, but in balance, where both laughter and tears could flow freely.